like learning to use a mobile phone over a Blackberry. Those of us who do that are going to be the ones who can adapt quickly to how the new expectations will be for in-house counsel.
Today, my guest is Tina Hwang, the head of legal at ClassDojo, an edtech platform that reaches 45 million students and parents worldwide. Before ClassDojo, Tina was a vice president and deputy general counsel at Twitter, associate general counsel at WhatsApp, where she led a 30-person legal team, and she spent nearly a decade at Google supporting products from Google Fiber to Google Shopping and being among the earliest folks in the role of product counsel, which we talk a lot about on this podcast. Before any of that, though, Tina was a software developer. She wrote code for 2 years out of Stanford before deciding law and policy were where she wanted to be. Like many of the guests on our show and myself, Tina is a child of immigrants, and she's built legal functions for some of the most globally used products in the world. She's taken on compliance that a lot of people in the field, find difficult and challenging, trust and safety considerations, global issues. This is going to be a good one. Tina, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. And may I say, it is a pleasure to be in sort of the company of in-house royalty. I think of you as in-house royalty, by the way. It's such a legendary story of a in-house counsel moving up the ranks to GC and now founder and starting your own company. It's amazing. You are a role model for us all. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Oh, thank you so much, Tina. That was super kind. Excited to dive in. And, this idea that like in-house legal is having a moment now, it makes me so happy. So I'm really excited to dive in with you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
All right. So ClassDojo, tell us, what is the product and how do users and students experience it?
Yeah, ClassDojo is, at its core, it's a communication collaboration app. So it's not actually like that much different than my work at WhatsApp or at Twitter and any of my other stops, in the sense that it enables teachers, parents, and kids to communicate and collaborate with one another. It's really interesting in this moment as tech tools are popping up in the classroom, because it's such an important function, but it's also an important function to do so in a safe manner. And so I love it in terms of the issues it raises to really build a product where trust is very much at its core and very much part of its identity and design. It's great to be part of that conversation and great to be part of that thinking in terms of building that product for trust first.
So part of my role, I worked on Kindle at Amazon, and then I was at a company called Anki that had products for kids as well. And the way I thought about it was like, okay, these are people's kids. Whatever the legal risk or whatever the issue, just kind of take it. You can imagine like a dial, just like turn it up some percentage.
Absolutely.
So how does that show up? Is it like at the feature level? Is it like, even in their hiring of someone like you to lead legal? Like what does that mean for like on the legal side? And then do you have any kind of like pearls of wisdom or ways that you explain that to folks in the business?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have wisdom. I have a lot of scars from many different problem solving situations and many different crisis situations. But I think you're absolutely right. When you build a product like ClassDojo and other products where you're really asking a community to rely on you and to really trust you with their kids, their sensitive data, it could be any product that is basically asking for that trust. I think you really have to think about almost legal compliance as kind of table stakes, and really not really the question that you want to be asking for. And I know that's a really spicy take for a lawyer to say, like, it's not about the law. But what I mean is that the law is really sort of the foundation and an input when you think about building for trust. But really, you're talking about creating that feeling, and it's almost recreating that human emotion between the user and that technology. And that is more than a legal compliance exercise. And it almost has to happen at sort of a infrastructure type level where you start thinking about your product from design onwards in terms of how do you create that emotion and how do you build upon that emotion so that users keep on coming back to you. And I know that's something, Cecilia, you believe in, because I think I heard a podcast that you were on where you talked about how creating that emotion was such an impact for one of your engineers. And I do think that that's kind of the winning recipe for really creating that trust, is really designing for that at a foundational level. And there's not a science to it. And I think that's the tricky part. There's not a science to it. It takes, values, it takes principles, it takes a lot of deep conversation because you're almost recreating that human relationship. And when you think about human relationships, you're kind of recreating, these fundamentals of who are you, transparency, why should I rely on you? How do you create that consistency with your product? What happens when I have a falling out with you? How do I control this? How do I dispute this? And then fundamentally, will you embarrass me? Will you shame me? And that's another thing that it's deeply human. And I think sometimes people don't understand that when we're recreating tech. We talk about growth and metrics, but we don't talk about that feeling where creating that feeling really brings the user back to you again and again and again. And might I add, will come back to you despite perhaps like a price increase, or despite, other services popping up that may undercut you on price. That creation of feeling of reliability, of knowing how you got to the answer that you're giving me, or how you got to where you are in terms of the reliance of the system. That's, I think, really fundamental to creating a system and a technology that's based on trust. And again, the spicy take here is that the legal compliance component, it's just one factor. It's just one factor of that entire equation.
Yeah, I mean, when I advised on trust and safety ones, it was like, it's not illegal to have a product where, your users hate each other and are super mean.
Yeah.
That's not illegal.
Totally.
But like you used a lot of very emotive words, right?
Yeah.
Trust and love and feeling and shame and all these things. Make that real for us, right? So like you're in a feature discussion and, I'm going to make this up. Let's say, they want a feature where, you can sell advertising or something. I mean, like I'm making this up, but like think of like a crazy feature. How do you actually ground the legal advice or the advice that you're giving, right? Which of course is beyond legal, but legal is one piece of it. But what it would make us a fly on the wall. You're advising on some new thing,
Yeah.
and you're trying to distill that wisdom that you just gave. What does it look like?
I'll give you examples from many different stops. And so first of all, we have this idea that well, COPPA only applies to kids under 13. Great, but when I sit in a design meeting with my engineers and my product people, I often ask them, hey, do you have a 14-year-old? Do you have a 15-year-old? Do you have a 16-year-old? When I talk about age appropriate design, just forget about the law. Forget about COPPA, forget about the law. What capability do you think your 14, 15, and 16-year-olds have in terms of understanding what this technology is doing and how to control it? And you just put yourself as a parent in those shoes and really ground yourself in the user in this case, which is your 14, 15, 16-year-old. And how do you think they would be interacting with this product? And how do you think they would be able to understand what you're trying to tell them? And I think that really grounds the conversation when you are trying to not only meet a compliance bar, but design for trust, is really grounding in what that user is, who that user is, I should say, and also what their capabilities will be, and giving a really close example of like, would you expect your 80-year-old grandmother to understand this? Would you expect your 14-year-old to understand this? And what level of control would you want as a parent for any of this, regardless of the legal ramifications and the legal bar? What would you want from the perspective of being a parent of a 14-year-old? And usually that sends the all of my tech people on edge, because they're like, oh my gosh, my 14-year-old, they're crazy, like they don't understand anything, like I do not trust them with the internet whatsoever. I'm like, great, so let's start there. So, let's start there. For if you're designing for a 14-year-old and you're a parent, what would you expect and what would you want to control? You and I are children of immigrants. It plays out also differently globally. And so oftentimes in a conversation, I also want to bring up, not only are you designing for this user that you have in your mind, but you're designing, let's say, for the user that is also maybe different. And so you also have to think about, hey, the user sitting in Asia, in LATAM, in Europe, may think a lot differently about this. So let's also think about that. And I think in those conversations, grounding yourself in sort of the real life examples of how users would be interacting with your product and the expectations is usually the place to start for those trust discussions.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it sounds a lot like product design at large, right? So Deb Liu, was I think you worked with it when she was CEO, but she was at Meta and tells a story in her book of how she made the case over a number of years that Facebook should have a marketplace.
Yep.
And one of the things that she explained was, well, when you have a baby and you want to get, a stroller or whatever, then like clearly like this is a local thing where you're not going to like ship your stroller or whatever. So there should be a local marketplace. And she talks about how at the time, a lot of the engineers that she was working with, didn't have kids slash were rich because they were to Facebook. So this idea of like, a resale marketplace a la Craigslist was just like not landing. And then she tells the story that like 5 years later, they started to have kids and we're like, Deb, you were like so 1,000% right. And so is it this like, do you seek out companies that have that user empathy? Do you look at user stories? Like, how does that, I guess, customer empathy that you explained, like, give us maybe one or two more examples of how that shows up at ClassDojo, or you were also at Twitter, or just and any fun example of kind of a user empathy story that helped you reach a legal goal.
Yeah, it's so funny. I think user empathy comes in so many different ways, and sometimes, at large companies, there's like a whole dedicated team for like UX research, and you want to make sure that you're plugged in and you can do testing with anything that you're releasing. But for most companies, they're not going to have that. They're not going to have a whole dedicated team dedicated to this. And so I think you're trying to hire for people at the ground level that have that intuitive sense of connecting with the user and creating technology that connects with the user in that way. At the smaller companies, you don't have a UX team, but guess what? You can hire a whole team of product designers and product managers and engineers who have that sense of like, wait a minute, who is my user and what am I building this? What am I building this? Who am I building this for? And what am I doing here? And really almost creating that sense from the ground up that is what you want to gravitate towards. When we launched location features were like the big thing when we were coming up, in our time at the big companies, of like, oh my god, it's amazing with these phones, you can share your location, and it is great. Guess what? As soon as we enabled these features, we started hearing from women who were domestic violence survivors who absolutely hated that this function was default on. We heard from folks outside of the country where conversely, location tracking was like this is great. I actually want this for the safety of my family, of knowing where everybody is. And so, even after the design period, you start getting sort of the real life feedback after you release the product. And I think there you really have to be mindful of that feedback. And that usually comes through from a really good CX customer support team who's able to surface these trends and be able to pivot quickly, because you're not going to be able to think of every different scenario before you launch. It's the whole launch and iterate mode that Silicon Valley is known for. But the ability to pivot quickly when you get that feedback of like, oh, we never thought about how this would impact domestic violence survivors. We never thought about, wait a minute, like this control setting, we may want this default off for certain circumstances. We may actually want this default on in other circumstances when there's a minor involved and maybe parents want to set up their accounts in that way. And so I really think that first kind of hiring for that talent from the very beginning for that intuitive sense, and then also being able to pivot quickly once you get that user feedback is the key to success there.
Love it. So, relevant here to this kind of design mindset, listening to user feedback, iterating. Obviously, that's kind of a lot of the Silicon Valley way. You've worked at some iconic companies on that. You came up as a software developer, and then you spent a decade at Google, and this idea of being an embedded product counsel. So, what does that mean? And
Was it a
what
real job? Is that what you're trying to ask me?
yeah, I mean, it was like, well, I think like the idea of product counsel. So you mentioned in the prep, Alex Mangelray, and then I forgot the other person that you mentioned.
Hwang and Alex McGilvery. Yeah,
Yes,
they were sort
yes.
of the OGs of the product council concept. Yeah, it's so funny when I first started as in-house counsel, I had an IP background, and so my family just assumed, oh, you're doing IP, you're a patent counsel, and and to this day, I feel like my dad still doesn't understand what I do. But one time I tried to explain, it was like, no, no. So I'm actually, a business counsel. I'm a product counsel. He's like, so you deal with the IP, right? I was like, yes, kind of, sort of. And it was actually the brainchild of, I don't know if it was actually Alex and Nicole who started it, but I'll just attribute it to them, since they were the ones who first introduced me to this concept of really embedded counsel within a product area or business line, who not only could advise you on the legal issues, but were such embedded that they're able to really understand the product and the legal risk trade off and be able to kind of calibrate their advice in a way that normal outside counsel, normal in house counsel that was just functionally aligned wouldn't be able to do. And so it was such a really great training ground for a junior lawyer like myself, being able to just be thrust into and embedded within this product line and just learn all about the product, and then be able to make these risk trade-offs and really kind of help advise the business, particularly emerging businesses, as they're trying to make these risk decisions in a rapid way so that they could grow. And it is really, I think, a really neat job that's been created out of in-house tech. And I think really, especially in the age of AI, I think I see these funny job postings now of frontier counsel. It's like, what is that? Like frontier model counsel. And I was like, and then I read the description. I'm like, oh, okay. So this is a product counsel who is going to advise on the creation of frontier models. I get it. I get that. And so I really think it was just a really great creation of a specialty within the in-house ranks. And I think it's again so impactful right now in the age of AI, where in-house is moving quickly, you have to transition quickly, and you have to really, really understand the products to advise the business in a risk calibrated way.
Of everything you achieved as product counsel, either at Google or Twitter or now ClassDojo, what are you most proud of?
Ooh, great question. I go back to, you'll know, you'll notice I go back to the human theme a lot. And I definitely go back to the fact that I was able to build large teams and build legal frameworks from scratch and be able to advise these emerging businesses, but have such deep impact on the people. I think that those as you look back on our career, when you think about the titles or the projects, like those kind of like fade away, but you really think about the people that you've mentored. They reach out to you of like, hey, what do you think about this, what do you think about that, even if you're no longer managing them. And then you have your PMs and eng folks who reach out to you and are like, hey, like, I have this legal question, my lawyer's telling me X, but I don't really know, and I just want to like calibrate that with you. And so you think about sort of those relationships and how they last, and they give me so much pleasure when someone from my network who I don't work with on a daily basis reaches out like that, because then that you've kind of created that lasting impact, through growing and scaling a legal team, and that they not only they value you as a coworker, but they value you as a person who had good judgment, and now they're faced with uncertainty again, and they're like, hey, I could really like value your judgment here, and be a sounding board. And yeah, that's what I would say that I'm most proud of, is that I've been able to create those relationships and kind of create that network.
You mentioned developing your people. You had a team of 35, product counsel. We have a lot of listeners who are at different points in their careers and their in-house careers. Um, what makes someone stand out and make you want to invest more in them?
It's a great question. It's so funny because my answer is probably will probably have changed over the years if you've asked me this like earlier in my career as a manager versus now. And you know, it used to be that I hired for a certain background training. Oh, they've been at this place, they've been at that place. I know that they will have the requisite training, and they've been through the fire, and so they'll know what to do. But now I really look for that baseline curiosity, especially in the age of AI tooling in the legal space. And you know, GCAI is changing how the legal practice is done in the Silicon Valley, and so many other tools like GCAI as well. I don't need the lawyer necessarily that can recite the treatise to me, or has done this 5 different times. I need the lawyer who is going to be able to adapt, and who has this both basically innate curiosity to explore more. And so now that's what I look for when I hire and I really mentor and nurture folks, because I think that's the evolution of being the in house lawyer. It's that lawyer who is going to sit down with a tool like GCAI and say, you know what, I'm going to play around with this, and I'm going to set up my workflow such that I can start my day basically with like 10% of my work already popped up for me, and also analyzed for what I should prioritize. It takes a certain, I think, mindset to be curious about that and to play and to explore and to maybe change the way that they've always done things. And that to me is talent in this day and age, and talent that I look for in growing my team is that curiosity and adaptability, and that desire to grow while this legal landscape is changing.
I love this. The human theme comes through so resoundingly where
I
I say,
know.
who sticks out in your team at 35? And I'm thinking, calibration and skill assessment and these things. And you're like, nope, curiosity and play are literally part of your answer. That's fantastic. How does that, how do lawyers do that? Because I guess for us, the drive that we have to be perfect, to do a very good job, to be good at things, right? So I took one of these like Myers-Briggs type things and it said, you don't like to play games you can't win. And I was kind of like, yeah, that sounds right. So how do you foster in your team that everything you described, knowing, the kind of lawyer personality? And then if you want to generalize that, you said, this is a new era. You've got GCAI, you've got other tools where, the legal answer, the research is effectively free. So how do you foster that both as a profession and in your people then, given this perfectionist slash want to win personality?
I know. I actually think that's like one of the major hindrances of lawyers who want to further develop into legal executives or climb the executive ladder is that desire to know with certainty that the answer that they're giving is 100% correct, and know that every like case law cited in their head for the answer that they're going to give. And again, this is going to be a spicy take of like, Tina Hwang said the law does not matter for being a legal executive, and that is not what I mean. What I mean is that I do think it is a balance when you are kind of rising the level of your legal game in terms of being able to meet the business where it's at in terms of business need, and be able to deliver maybe the 80% answer in a confident way, and know that that's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And so to kind of train yourself to allow yourself to be not perfect. I know that that's a roundabout way of answering your question, but I do think that as lawyers, we're trained to be 100% certain, 100% buttoned up on the law. And yes, you do have to know your stuff. Do not get me wrong. You have to know your stuff, and you have to almost like start with that as table stakes. But once you get to a certain level where you develop that instinct and that judgment, guess what? Like your 80% is probably better than most folks out there, because you've honed that 80% for the practical reality of the circumstance, because you've been through the fire, of you've launched products at Cruise and at Amazon of like autonomous vehicles, of like you've been through the fire, and so you know that your 80% is pretty good. And so I think to really kind of allow yourself that mindset, and then also I think to also carve out time. Sometimes I think that we're so wedded to our to-do list. And by the way, if you ask my husband, he's like, I cannot believe you're saying this on a podcast, because you have a million and one to-do lists. And he's absolutely right. I do have a million and one to-do lists. But I also try to carve out my Friday afternoons for almost, I wouldn't call it play, but I would say I carve out an hour or two of like, you know what? I'm just going to play around with creating a skill. Like, what is that? What is a connector? How do I connect the AI tool to my Drive, to my Slack? how do I do this? I'm just gonna play around with this a little bit. And so carving out that 1 hour in an afternoon just to allow yourself that mind space to do that, I think is also really key. In addition to like letting yourself have some rope of like, you know what, like this is going to be 80% and this is actually going to be okay. And it's actually better for the business that they get an answer from me that's 80% right now.
I love that. Um, you've had switching gears a little bit, you've had a very global job. You mentioned stepping up in different moments, crises. One of our guests had been, Holly Hogan had met, I think, royalty in Jordan based on some public policy things she was doing. Any fun? I know that was cool. That was cool. Any fun kind of stories? Obviously, at Twitter, I think I heard someone speak from the Twitter trust and safety team and said, 1 in a million on Twitter happens every 7 minutes because there's more than a million tweets every 7 minutes. And so you think of these 1 in a million occurrences, freak accidents, whatever it is, or kind of like some of the user issues that you mentioned. Anything you can share or any moment that stands out, you're like, I'm going to get on a plane to country X because crisis Y.
Yeah, I mean, I so appreciate my time at WhatsApp because it really did put me in the mindset of you're not building for a US audience because WhatsApp at that time was not popular with the US audience. It actually was more popular and more widely used by design internationally. And talk about trust by design. The co-founders of WhatsApp really kind of built the end-to-end encryption in mind with a global mindset, and also kind of built the product from a global perspective because one of the founders actually was also an immigrant. And so to me, that that atmosphere of coming into a product that was also global from its start was such an amazing experience. And we forever wanted to launch payments in India for WhatsApp, and we finally did. And I remember sort of the day that we did. It was in the middle of COVID, and I there was no offices, and in order to launch I had to sign this document from the, I believe, like the government of India or some, and I was just such surrealness of I had to have a notary come to my house in the middle of COVID, and it's this official government document that I'm signing with the government of India in order to launch this thing. And this has been a 24-hour window after negotiating with the government of India and the banks of India and the regulators of India. And it really does highlight that when you operate at that global stage, it's almost as much about the law as it is politics. And we had a 24-hour political window in which this would launch into a pilot, and we took that. And there was obviously there was risk, and there were many conversations about risk. But I think when you operate at that global scale, you have to be prepared to seize upon the political wins as well, and have that be a factor in your launch planning, essentially. And I think, sometimes when companies only build for the US, that gets lost a little bit. It gets lost that when you launch globally, you're being invited to the house of another, and you have to learn the rules of that of that house, and you have to understand the customs, and you have to understand the politics, and that takes a lot of investment, and it also takes a lot of understanding of the politics of what's surrounding that particular country. And I think that gets underappreciated sometimes when businesses have found tremendous success in the US. and then they try to retrofit what it means to launch successfully globally.
Interesting. So you mentioned politics. I think couple things that I'd be curious your take on. Um, so when you work at Meta, and in particular on WhatsApp, but also in general, 2 out of 3 humans on Earth use a Meta service every day. And when you think about the impact, I read an article once where the journalist opined that, your average director at Meta perhaps has more power than many heads of state in terms of impact that they can have on someone's daily life, right? So you turn on payments in India and suddenly 1 billion people can transact. You shut down a service in a country and you can affect, political things, obviously famously elections, but also just people's daily lives.
Mm-hmm.
How do you not let, or how did people at the company not let that go to their heads?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm gonna need a drink of coffee while I think about that one. That is a spicy one. You know, I It's so funny. When we were coming up, it was social media. That social media and being part of social media, like that was sort of like the bell of the day. And you're absolutely right. Like you do feel the impact of that and the weight of that, and hopefully, you understand that with great power also comes great responsibility. But I also think that in order to stay humble and stay hungry, you have to also understand the evolution of tech. I mean, you and I, we've been in the Valley for a long time, so we've seen these ebbs and flows, and so I think that the bell of the day is AI. It's no longer social media, and before that it was AR VR, and so I think one has to, particularly for someone like me and you have been around. You stay humble when knowing that these things ebb and flow. One day you are working on the the bell of the day tech that's going to change and revolutionize the world, and it will. But guess what? This is how tech works. The next day there is going to be another innovative breakthrough, and that's going to be sort of what everybody gravitates towards in terms of this is the tech that's going to save the day, save the world, impact the world. And so I think staying humble is easy when you've been through these ups and downs. If you're young and you're just coming up and you're like you're riding the wave, I would, I guess, again, this is going to be another human element story. I would say I would study the history, study the history of tech, learn learn from the pitfalls of social media and how it came to be and the power it had, and then also the responsibility that it had, and how in some cases it stepped up to the responsibility, in some cases it may not have stepped up to the responsibility as quickly as we would have wanted, and learn and hopefully understand that you are in a great powerful position now with the ability to impact folks, but it also comes with responsibility, and make sure that you understand what that responsibility is, and hopefully take those lessons that I'm talking about in terms of building for trust, and drive that within your organization.
One more question before we'll turn the tables, which is a fun one.
Yeah.
Yeah, one more. So you mentioned AI is the belle of the ball. You've been in tech a long time. You're a student of history. What is your prediction for AI? It's 3 years from now. How are we practicing law?
Wow. That's another great one. You know, I don't I don't believe in extremes. So I'm not I don't believe in like the AI is gonna replace, every single lawyer out there. Nor do I believe that like, oh, AI is completely a bust. But I do think that like mobile phones, we will be in 3 years' time, we will adapt to basically a workflow that encompasses every single legal workflow will encompass AI. There will be no workflow that doesn't have AI, from intake to research to output. I do think that there will always be some type of human judgment, to my kind of thesis in the beginning of like building for trust means that you do have to kind of build that relationship with the human operator in showing the work and making sure that they, particularly with legal AI tools, that the lawyer who is ultimately going to deliver the work product is comfortable that that is the work product and they're going to continue to rely on you. And so, in the same way, when I was, this is again dating me incredibly, but I had a BlackBerry, right? Like I had a BlackBerry, like
I'm gonna like that's what you reminded me of. Like I think we're in the BlackBerry era
yeah,
where I tell
yeah,
this story that when I was at Yahoo, they came out and said, okay, only directors and above can have Blackberries. And I
right,
remember being like, one day I will be a director and I will get one. But like now, obviously, it's funny because in
right,
3 years, then it went from directors only to literally, can you imagine trying to work without a phone? Like it makes
right,
no
right,
sense. It
exactly,
literally is like
exactly.
it becomes like the water where like you're in it.
Exactly, totally, exactly. And so, like, you and I had Blackberries, and that was like the coolest thing. And for the longest time, I loved that thing because of the whole like tactile,
Tactile. I
like,
know, so
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Bring
I
back.
loved it. I loved it. But can you again, like, every single workflow now has to be created
Yeah.
for the mobile instance, and mobile phones are so integrated with your legal workflow. And I think in the same way with AI, it's just going to be part of your workflow, just like a mobile phone. Of like, no, you're not going to just like carry around your IBM ThinkPad with you
No,
everywhere.
exactly. Well,
You're gonna have your set of tools that you rely on.
no, I mean I love it. It's like I think if we think of the soundbite for the LinkedIn post here is like we're in the BlackBerry era of AI, and like soon we'll be past it. I love that. All
I
right,
think
so
I still have my BlackBerry actually somewhere like in
I
my
know,
in
I
my
know. Nice.
boxes. I have it because I loved it so
Incredible
much.
product design, incredible product naming, and now they're an IP company to that point. But all right, so let's turn the tables. So a reason for the turning tables. So Tina is an LP in the Counsel, which was an early investor in GCAI. So the Counsel is comprised of operators around the Valley, and Amber Illig, who is the principal and founder of that VC fund, and I work together at Cruise. So essentially, Tina, I guess full disclosure here, is a small investor in GCAI through that position. But based on that, I'm going to turn the tables. She's going to interview me. Go ahead, Tina.
Yeah, well, listen. Again, I open up the podcast by saying just like how amazing your career has been, and really, I mean that because I think to make the transition from the legal field to the business field, being CEO and starting up your own business, like it's a big mind shift. And you had asked me like, how do you train yourself to think in different ways, and I would love to kind of understand from you, like, how did you train yourself from being kind of the risk counselor in the risk counselor in the room, to now sort of the opposite end of like you're now the decision maker and you have this like legal person probably buzzing in your ear saying like this is the risk, like like what should we do? How was that shift for you, and how do you think about risk differently now as the CEO?
Yeah, so this is fundamental to making the shift from GC to CEO, absolutely. And in my case, I sometimes don't know how long I stayed at GC because the risk training, like I understood the risk, but I always gravitated to the opportunity. And I think that to the product counsel point made me quite a good product counsel, because product counsel was really product development. It wasn't, should we launch this? It was, how do we launch the thing?
Yeah.
And now I think that thinking in terms of opportunity, of like, what happens if this is a smashing success? That's one of my favorite questions to ask during a product review, is like, what does wild success look like for this? And this like idea that I got from Amazon of think big, that thinking big is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And similarly, we've talked on this pod about a book called Burn the Boats. And his point is, if you spend all this time on the risk on plan B, that's mental energy you're not spending on plan A. Now, that being said, I incredibly value my lawyers, my GC, the risk mindset. We had almost did an acquisition recently we ended up walking away from, and then it turned out that it was absolutely the right decision. And even in my own career, like, I would encourage people to practice this looking for opportunity. And looking for opportunity can be your own job search, for example. Like leaving the safety of a big company for AI right now, that's a tough decision. But if you look at it of like, what does wild success look like, and bet on yourself, that's how you make the transition. But I will admit it is still, hard. And it's something where I come back to like, what is it? The most secure software does nothing. If you take no risk, you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
And so that's, I would say, the biggest step that I've taken.
I love that. And so often, this is kind of a pet peeve of mine. Like, so often we would go into these like big launch meetings of like, face rec is definitely one that's, fraught with uncertainty. So at any company that sort of like wants to do anything within that area, you have to kind of identify sort of the risk. And to me, I was almost, almost perplexed. I'm like, wait a minute. We all know the risks. Like, we all know that this is a risky area. Why are we talking about this? Why are we not talking about the opportunity? Like, tell me about the opportunity and the upside, so that we could really evaluate like what the trade-offs are. Like, let's talk about the upside. And I feel like sometimes we don't talk about that enough. Like, what is the upside and what is the opportunity?
When I come back to some of, your whole student of tech thing, right? Where it was like, okay, so online advertising, used to be that serving relevant ads was a debate, right? And I remember people like Ann Toth, presenting to Congress and things about it, that like, hey, actually people want relevant ads.
Yeah.
And now, my Instagram feed, pretty relevant. I'm getting like, athletic greens and whatever it is I'm being served, kind of like workout stuff and, beautiful purses and whatever. And like this idea that personalization as a tech used to be controversial, and now it's not. So that turning that on, I think tech taught me that as well. I think it's a nice, and I think other industries now at GCAI, we work with many lawyers in many different industries. I think AI has turned that on quite a lot for industry, which has been fun to see.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, with new technology, the I would say that the user tolerance of risk also changes as well. And so, there were at a privacy conference that I attended once, the someone said something that just it really like stuck with me, of how AI basically could swallow the concept of privacy. Now, again, like, I don't think that don't take that to the extreme, but you know what? If I had a good personal assistant that could do a lot of the tasks that I spend my brain doing, rather than, doing the stuff I want to be doing, I might be willing to make some of the trade-offs on privacy that would be different than what I had previously made, if I could get that power of that assistant.
Totally. I mean, you think about even, to your point on location, right? It used to be like maps, you couldn't, you had to print your map, and now you can go where you want to go. I love this. This has been such a fun conversation, Tina.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Awesome. All right. So last one, just a parting words of wisdom in a couple of sentences. Someone is a new lawyer just starting out at a company. What's your 2 sentences of advice?
Ooh, I think it goes back to stay curious, and of course know the law, study the law, and really understand the law and understand the legal concepts, but also be very flexible because the legal industry is changing, and you will need to change your practice in accordingly. And those of us who are going to change our practice and be able to adapt to the tools, like learning to use a mobile phone over a Blackberry, those of us who do that are going to be the ones who can adapt quickly to how the new expectations will be for in-house counsel. And so be hungry, and soak up the sponge of the law. That remains consistent, but also remain flexible and be curious about exploring technology in a way that I don't think. I think this is like the golden age of legal tech, and so be willing to explore there, and stay what is it, stay hungry, stay foolish, like stay
Perfect.
hungry there, and exploring those tools.
I love it. So with a Steve Jobs quote and so much wisdom, that was Tina Hwang, the head of legal at ClassDojo, one of the sharpest product and privacy minds we've had on this show. An incredible reminder to be human and consider history as you move forward. So whether you're leading a legal team, working inside one, building the tools that power them, or just want to learn more and lean into your curiosity, to Tina's point, head over to gc.ai to learn more about us and how other forward thinking leaders in legal are doing their best work. Follow CZ and Friends wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.